3, 2, 1. Good morning, and thank you for attending today's recognition of the 10-year anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. I'm Gina Kim. In 2011, much like the global movement in other countries, Occupy served as a response to the most pressing challenges our country was facing, especially in the wake of the financial crisis of 2008. 10 years later, Occupy never went away. Instead, it grew and spread to influence so many movements today, spanning across political campaigns from presidential to city level. We'll hear today how the Occupy movement leaders created the atmosphere for growth of the Bernie Sanders campaign and changed the entire way we were speaking about the 99% in this country. The movement led to the strongest congressional challenge against the Speaker of the House and sparked many intersectional city and state level electoral runs, led to many banking and financial reforms at all levels, helped shape the fight for $15 and workers' rights, tackled the student loan and healthcare debt crisis with solutions that improved the lives of millions of people, took on policing and criminal justice reform, as well as fought against the country's drive to expensive wars, led to indigenous and youth-inspired movements for climate change, and brought together people from all communities to focus on real solutions. As a leaderless movement as a whole, it allowed individuals to excel in leadership in their own rights, but its visibility is needed now more than ever in 2021. When Occupy started, it was often referred to as a fringe concept, but many concepts now inform every sector of our humanity today as we address many catastrophes in 2021. Many of the ideals of Occupy are typical topics on the table at some of the most prominent change organizations today. And our first speaker, Jay Ponte, author of the upcoming book, Be the Revolution, will offer an overview on the many ways that Occupy has shaped our current movements. And I will now put this back over to you, Jay. Welcome.
Thanks, Gina, and great to see everyone this morning. Mic check, everyone. It's
mic check.
Yeah, mic check.
Mic check.
And we can't believe that it's been 10 years since Occupy Wall Street, the historic uprising. And we're coming together today to uplift this movement in this critical time in our nation's history, because the dominant cultural narrative is that Occupy failed, which is a narrative that was driven by the corporate media. And of course, we're here to set the record straight, because Occupy Wall Street fundamentally reshaped American politics. And we'd like to talk a little bit today about some of the impact that happened in 2011 and has continued to happen through the last 10 years. One event in particular was that the Bernie Sanders campaign itself would not have happened if not for a group of occupiers who got together and decided that it would be very important to issue a challenger to the establishment candidate, and formed a group called the People for Bernie. Beyond that, countless other movements, from public banking to the fight for 15, came out of those fights. Occupiers have been on the front lines of the anti-fracking movement, the climate movement, the movement for health justice, racial justice, and virtually every other frontline fight that has been happening. Many people haven't really been hearing about what's been happening on the front lines, but of course, because of course, it's not in the interest of the stakeholders of the corporate state to report on this. So we're going to center today just a few of the activists that have continued on. They've gone into electoral politics. They've been organizing affinity groups on the front lines. And we also like to thank act.tv for hosting this today. Act.tv itself, the platform you're watching, most of the people involved were day one occupiers in Zuccotti Park. And so we'd like to center just a few of those voices, as well as let you know that on September 17th, there will be a number of events happening. There's definitely going to be events happening in Zuccotti Park, in Los Angeles, in Boston. So we encourage folks to go and check that out and join in person, because one of the main things about Occupy is it got people out from behind the keyboard and showing up. In late stage capitalism, we suffer from atomization, which means we're separate, different, alone, which is one of the reasons Amazon is the most profitable company in the world. And Occupy got people out of the house and made it okay to protest without a permit. And so we invite you to come and join us in solidarity at Zuccotti Park. You can watch Act.tv for actions happening on the day on Friday. We'll also have in Los Angeles, we'll be joining with the youth climate strikers who have a number of demands for Joe Biden. And then they're also uplifting the Line 3 struggle. And so we invite you to join us on the 25th at City Hall, where the kids are actually going to be occupying City Hall. So that should be fun. Bring a tent. Who knows what can happen? But I would like to invite my friend, my comrade, Charles Lenchner from the People for Bernie and Roots Camp to come and join us now to tell us a little bit about what he has been up to.
Thank you. This press event was called with a clear purpose: to counter the narrative of Occupy Wall Street as a flash-in-the-pan protest that accomplished little, disappeared, and was replaced by progressive organizations who understood politics better. This is false. In actuality, the full spectrum process of political change begins with the most impacted and marginalized finding each other, experimenting with tactics and strategies, and eventually eclipsing what came before. You'll find in the stories and speakers today ample evidence of that process at work. I was part of two formations that exerted influence on national politics, launching the movement to draft Elizabeth Warren, which started in September of 2013 and was explicitly about an intervention in the Democratic primary. All the founders were, of course, occupiers from Zuccotti Park. We surfaced a vast amount of discontent, which we then mobilized in support of Bernie Sanders. The People for Bernie Sanders descended from that group and was instrumental specifically in getting veterans of Occupy Wall Street involved before the Sanders campaign was officially launched and throughout. While Sanders was not elected president, it remains true that countless political successes have been built on the House of Occupy, with direct continuity of the individuals involved, the networks created, and the creative tactics employed. This is especially true when it comes to marrying the power of social media with electoral and non-electoral organizing efforts. Today, I'm proud to remain involved in the People for Bernie Sanders, a social media publisher that reaches 4 million people a month. I work for Roots Action, a seminal progressive advocacy organization that has been part of the fight to shrink the Pentagon budget and many other anti-war efforts. The training organization I co-founded, Organizing 2.0, has had thousands of organizers and activists inside and outside the labor movement receive training, especially in using those digital and social media tactics. All of these efforts would simply not exist in their current form, absent the struggle of Occupy Wall Street. The media often portrayed us as unwashed, inexperienced, unhinged, drug-addled, homeless, and deserving of the violence unleashed on our bodies. Today, we are elected to office, managing electoral and advocacy campaigns, crafting policy, publishing and creating content, and so much more. Welcome to the world Occupy made, not good enough, but full of hope, optimism, creative action, and a better life for millions. The last point I'll make is that Occupy Wall Street was a coming out party for millennials demanding change. Tens of millions of Americans were and are suffering from student debt, lack of affordable housing, inaccessible healthcare, wages we cannot live on, and jobs that crush our souls. Today, we have the rise of Medicare for all, a $15 minimum wage, dramatic actions in Congress to protect renters from eviction, and an escalating cry for the elimination of student debt, and so many more struggles. I know where they came from. I know who's doing that work. Many of them were at my side in Zuccotti Park or other encampments around the country. Press coverage should shine a spotlight on that instead of repeating a story that minimizes the success of wild and untamed protest in the streets. We started off fighting for people we didn't know, the most marginalized, struggles we might not have started, but we could help with. The moment we shifted to fight for our own interests, we changed America forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker who's up, Shahed Shahid Buttar, Nancy Pelosi's strongest election challenger since she was elected, having won more votes against her than any other previous candidate. Shahid, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Gina. I'm so honored to be a part of this group and had the distinct privilege when Occupy happened 10 years ago of leading a national civil liberties organization. When Occupy sprung up, it happened to be then the 10-year, we are now coming up on the 20-year anniversary also of the Patriot Act. So I had this national speaking tour lined up many months before the occupations emerged. And so once the occupations emerged, I got to visit almost 20 of them around the country, and from Occupy Providence and Philadelphia, where the occupation was drawing power from City Hall with the support of the mayor, to Los Angeles, where the LAPD tried to project an image of playing nice with the First Amendment before then viciously brutalizing people. There was such a spectrum across the country of occupations, the local cultures, how they were greeted by local authorities, and the ways that we ended up dramatically impacting not just the discussion at the time, but the continuing conversation today. First, one just fundamental principle that people forget: the reclamation of public space is an inherently profound act. It represents reclaiming stolen land. And many of us are not indigenous, but we stood in solidarity intersectionally. Intersectionality is a word that many people have come to understand and embrace in the years since. Many of us demonstrated it by occupying public space in the name of a set of issues that were not linearly defined. At the time, journalists who frankly didn't understand politics described us as being too unfocused, that we had too broad a platform. And that was a way to denigrate us by an establishment that, again, didn't understand, but has come to understand, I think, since, the way that so many of these different issues are inextricably interconnected. When we talk about the burden that now, at the time it was $1 trillion, now it's $1.7 trillion in student debt that is a yoke around the entire economy, the neck of the entire economy, and multiple generations that struggle with it. If our generation heeded us, and if Washington had heeded us 10 years ago, and we channeled our resources instead of into failed wars, into social needs like student debt, like universal health care, we were right ultimately. And not just in the sense of getting the policies right, but also recognizing how they fit together. We didn't just have an impact, for me as a candidate who went on to run for office, I would never have guessed in 2011 that I would one day run for office. It was the furthest thing from my mind. And I think it shows from my own path the impact of Occupy in creating and expanding opportunities for people. And the opportunity to go to so many of the different sites are one of the things that frankly helped give me a national lens on politics as opposed to a distinctly local one. And I see not just electoral efforts come out of the movement, but some of the first enforceable restrictions on local surveillance by police departments in the country were advocated for and secured by a network that came from particularly Occupy Oakland. And I've seen the enduring policy impact of the network in the years since. One other piece that's really important to note in this year, in 2021, is that because of the way the state responded to us, we became ultimately standard bearers for dissent principles that are not only embedded in the Constitution, but have become hyper-politicized in the years since. Think about the former president deploying DHS goon squads in Kenosha and Portland to paramilitarily suppress domestic dissent, constitutionally protected domestic dissent. We encountered that too 10 years ago. It was a few years after we encountered it that people saw the very vivid images from Ferguson, Missouri, right? Where again, militarized police force was used to suppress dissent. So we not only envisioned the crises that many people have come to recognize since and offered the prescriptions that were unfortunately ignored at the time, but we also endured the counterattack from the establishment that many people saw at the time, and I think have come to increasingly recognize as a threat, not just to the social movements that we all come from and the issues that we represent, but ultimately liberty and democracy in America. I'm incredibly proud to have been a part of the movement then and to identify as part of its continuing impact now. I would not have run for Congress if Occupy did not happen and shift the conversation as profoundly as we did. And I'm proud to continue advocating for our principles as we fight to defend the future from the failures of a predatory corporate past. Back to you, Gina.
Thank you so much, Shahid. Now I want to introduce our next guest, George Martinez. He is the current candidate for mayor of Anchorage in 2021. George.
Hello, everybody. Mic check.
Mic check.
Right
Mic
on.
check.
Mic check.
Excellent. Well, across multiple time zones, good to be here with you all. My name is George Martinez, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this historic week of celebration for a movement that helped to reveal that another world is possible. I'm holding this up today because I just want to highlight Occupy Sandy Relief. I mean, so my journey began in Occupy. Brother Jelani Mashariki is going to speak next. And we just got back from a cultural diplomacy mission, traveling across different countries. And I got back to the city, got into the Zuccotti Park, went into a people's, the General Assembly, and we utilized the people's mic. And my first comments out loud were, I just get back to my city to see real Americans taking over what is already ours. And that energy of being able to see the intersectionality as we talk about it, all of this different convergence of people coming together in public spaces was new, but it was built upon legacies of people who have been doing work for so many years. It was that combination with newly woke people, newly disenfranchised people. That convergence had the cloud of opportunity that some of us saw, and we came into it. But we also were focused on cultural relevancy. That was a really important component to the work that we did. Now, I come out of a political background, so social protest movement was something that was important to us. But we engaged with the tools that we had. And that was the call. Every person had the ability to find their talent, use their tool, and bring that into the collective square. That was a new moment for so many people. And we brought hip hop. We brought hip hop and we created the Occupy anthems. We started organizing with Occupy the Hood, and we were just involved in every which way possible, really behind the scenes as much as we can do, whether it was actions out in Brooklyn, whether it was organizing late at night, whether it was taking those first trips out to Detroit and starting to just connect the dots across people of color, people in the hood, and the movement. We were there at the front line. But we also started focusing on the language of direct action and electoral direct action, bringing that right into the forefront. And it was a challenge, to be clear, because there was so much diversity of opportunity, so many ways that we were all thinking about how to engage. But the electoral direct action was our ability to say, if we can mobilize in the park, we can mobilize in an election, we can mobilize to affect the outcome of elections. And so that's where we are. It's still happening. And I'm all the way up in Anchorage, Alaska, on the land of the Denina Athabascan, who I give that land acknowledgement to, recognizing that the movement continues. And we are still in a struggle to bring back democracy back to the people and away from the power of the corporate interest. Money out, people in. George Martinez, all the way up in Anchorage, Alaska.
Thank you so much, George. Thank you for that, for your level of passion there. Next up, we have, who do we have? We have Jelani Mashariki. Jelani, I hand the mic over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Mic check, everybody. Mic check.
Mic check.
Mic check.
All right. So George spoke a lot about the introduction of us to Zuccotti, but I would like to go a little bit deeper and build on some points that Jay spoke about in terms of how Occupy moved the needle. First and foremost, I come from a politically active family that have built institutions and were responsible for bringing community control to New York City. My uncle, my father. So in 22nd, my uncle G2 had went down to Zuccotti. Well, let me start this. Prior to the occupation at Zuccotti, there was an occupation at the Bank of America in Queens, organized by some teachers. I think it was the Coalition for Public Education and some other teachers
that were organizing it. Justin Wheatus, my man Radio Raheem, and a few others helped organize that. And then the next thing I know, my uncle was speaking at Zuccotti, and he said, Jelani, you need to get down there. And I said, why? He said, well, there's some young people that are organizing, and the time is now, because there had been a lull in people in the streets and reclaiming public spaces and taking over the streets, showing their frustrations prior to Occupy in the United States. And so this was a reinvigoration for the older generation, like, hey, hold on, there's some young people out here doing some things and we need to be down there, we need to be supporting them. And so we headed down there, and from there it was pretty much history, because the direct action and the activation of the direct action is what drew me to everyone. I understood there wasn't a lot of Black people there, African Americans there, but people were organizing and they were providing services in Zuccotti Park, which for me was big. And I understood that this was going to launch other people being involved in direct actions, and specifically other people of color. So that led to, of course, Black Lives Matter, people of color saying, you know, we need to reclaim our streets, and then all of the other political actions, Bernie Sanders and everyone else. So I ran for city council in 2013. I know I got to wrap up, but it's a lot to talk about. I ran for city council in 2013, understanding that we needed to activate more people. So every action that we took was an action to activate more people to understand that they control what is happening in the United States and they need to be a part of it. So that was the real big picture, to show people that you do have the power, and the power's in the people, and the people must be addressed.
Thank you very much, Jelani. Thanks for that message. Next up, we have Susan Harmon. Susan, I will pass it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm in Oakland, and thanks, Shahid, for already calling out Oakland. What I want to talk about is the movements, the projects that grew out of Occupy Oakland. One is Oakland Privacy, which has had effects around the country on police surveillance and getting our rights to privacy back from the establishment. Another is Strike Debt East Bay, Strike Debt Bay Area, which organized a massive repayment of medical debt at a fraction of the original cost, bringing all those people out of debt. Next is Occupy the Farm. The University of California, Berkeley had an experimental farm that they were going to convert to projects, to a development, high income development. And the people took that over and grew food for the people. The Omni, it was an Italian ballroom, a huge building in Oakland that has been bought by the community and now serves as community space. I think it was actually a mafia organization first. And finally, and most important for me, is the public banking movement, which grew out of Strike Debt Bay Area. And I represent the Public Bank East Bay. We're very close to starting a public bank, the first one in 100 years in the country. But we also generated public banking movements around California. Los Angeles is also very close to starting a bank. San Francisco, San Diego, the Central Coast, the Northern Coast. This has been an incredibly active movement that has passed 2 pieces of legislation, state legislation, the only ones in the country so far. 2 years ago, we passed the California Public Banking Act, which lays out the pathway for local public banks to start. And just last week, we passed the AB 1177, which will subsidize banks to offer free checking, absolutely no free checking to those who are underbanked right now. So California is the leader in the country in the public banking effort, and it all came out of Occupy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Next up, we have Kim Frachek. She is the director of Sane Energy Project, which grew out of the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011. Sane Energy's mission is to defeat frack gas infrastructure, build renewable public power, and connect the dots of the fossil fuel industry to the greater extractive economy that Occupy was instrumental in exposing for the world. Kim, I will hand it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's awesome to see you all. I am currently on occupied Lenni Lenape land known as Pennsylvania, where my family lives, and our water is poisoned because of the fracking industry. And I live in occupied Muncie, Lenape, Canarsie land, which is known as Brooklyn, New York. I was active in the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011. And during that time, a number of folks caught wind of a big pipeline company called Spectra Energy that was building a massive fracked gas first of the transmission pipelines to connect the new fracking fields of Pennsylvania directly with New York City. And that was under the orders of Michael Bloomberg because he was invested in the fracking industry. And he had this whole campaign in New York City about switching from oil to gas because it was clean. Now, a lot of us were from Pennsylvania or West Virginia. We knew what was happening on the other side of that pipeline. And we were trying to connect the dots between fossil fuel infrastructure and this massive fight to stop fracking in New York State. We were trying to tell the fracking movement, hey, it's also the pipelines too. And they were like, don't complicate things, keep things under wrap. But we were able to, because the Occupy Wall Street movement and all the people we were speaking to in Zuccotti Park understood the connective infrastructure of the extractive economy, fossil fuel face of the extraction. It's like also the prison industrial complex, how our education system runs, how this nation of the United States was built on slavery, extraction, and genocide. And that is built into the institution. So I didn't really need to explain to the occupiers like why fighting this pipeline meant fighting all the other things too. We built a massive movement, and we started a spin-off group called Occupy the Pipeline, and we did a lot of direct action marches notifying the community about what was happening in the village at the time. And we were able to give people the vocabulary of how the fossil fuel industry is tied to the extractive economy and why we need to shut it down. We were also able to connect to other folks across the region that were fighting also very like weird esoteric infrastructure like water theft and compressor stations and waste dumps. And we were able to make a movement of people that were like, it's not just the drilling, it's also the fracking infrastructure. So we have now been able to build a national movement with people and really connect the dots that this is all rooted in racist and a racist extractive economy. And we have a vision of building another way, and we know another world is possible. And I'll be in Zuccotti Park this Friday talking about our latest campaign to a gas bill strike to protest one of the massive pipelines that's going through Brooklyn right now. Peace out, y'all. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. Now I'd like to bring on Jerry Ashton. He is founder of Let's Rethink This and retired to the board of RIP Medical Debt. Jerry.
Thank you. I'm so proud to be in the company of such wonderful people, people who rethought things to great effect. when Occupy began, I was on the West Coast for a family gathering, and I was watching TV and I saw some strange activity happening in Zuccotti Park. I thought, well, that looks interesting. I'll have to check that out. Being a former Navy journalist, writer and blogger, I like to document things. So what I did, since Occupy was just a few subway stops from my apartment in New York City, I headed down there to document it. And at the same time, I want you to know I was also retired, semi-retired from the collections industry. And I was there just because I wanted to know more. Oh, by the way, a shout out to Oakland, Susan. I was born there, East Oakland, just want you to know that. So what I learned in Occupy has transformed my thinking. I walked into Occupy Wall Street as a debt collector. I walked out of Occupy Wall Street as a debt forgiver. I worked with the initial people that started the Rolling Jubilee, served as a consultant into my industry so they would understand it better, and was able to participate in what was going on. And when Occupy began to dissipate thanks to being chased out of the park, we were approached. I was told that they were going to be going in a different direction. So a friend of mine looked at each other and we said, we can't let this happen. And we created RIP medical debt. Now, the Rolling Jubilee had abolished over $30 million of the student debt, payday loan debt, medical debt, of course. And so that was a good start. So when we started RIP medical debt, it was the intention of continuing to bring this problem to public awareness and also roll up our sleeves and really get into it. As of this last month, RIP medical debt has abolished over $5 billion worth of medical debt. So the thing is, it's a broken system. And the more we bring attention to the problem, the more we get people to go to the head of the parade where the problem is, the better chance we're going to have as occupiers, as movers and shakers to make that difference. So I'm looking forward to what is going to be happening. I'll be at Occupy again with whatever sign I find available and people I can join in with, because when I walked into Occupy, I was almost 3/4 of a century old at that time. Well, I think I'll try it one more shot. It's very rejuvenating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jerry. Next up, we have Kasambe Balagun, writer, activist, and father from the Bronx. Kasambe, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I apologize if I didn't.
Yes, you pronounced my name correctly. In African languages, all the letters in the name is very democratic. My name is Kazembe Balagun. I am from New York City. I'm currently speaking to you from Charleston, South Carolina. What brought me to Occupy in 2011 was the Troy Davis rally. Me and my partner at the time were expecting my first son. And we had walked about 3 miles for Troy Davis, who was an African-American who was wrongly accused of crime and was later executed by the state of Georgia. But there was a massive movement to free him. So me and my partner participated in that. And we were planning to go to what became Occupy at that time was S17. But my son had other plans for us. And my partner went into labor. And my son Miles was born the day after Occupy. So I had both. So this year I'm celebrating 10 years of occupation, but also 10 years of my son. And I celebrate them both with deep pride and, and with honor. Why I went down to Occupy? The reason I went down to Occupy was because of the legacy of racialized capitalism. We all know that the wall on Wall Street was built to keep the Native Americans out. And the first commodities sold on Wall Street were enslaved Africans. The legacy of redlining, exclusion, oppression of Black bodies and indigenous histories continued through that space of Wall Street. So understanding Wall Street is understanding racialized capitalism. So to occupy Wall Street was to fight against racialized capitalism. And at that time, Black people had been caught up in the subprime mortgage crisis, and were facing a double whammy in terms of increased levels of policing, which meant that we were both faced a whammy of police, over policing and housing discrimination, and Wall Street profited it. At that time, when I was down at Wall Street, I had organized a number of different programs. I've seen many of your faces down there. It was great to be here. What I found about Occupy Wall Street was that it was both a protest movement and a democracy-making movement. It built a democratic culture and had an outward face of protest. And folks came all over the city to be amplified, which gave it a vibrant scene. Lastly, what I want to say is that neoliberalism crushed Occupy through both state violence as well as co-optation. But the spirit of Occupy lived in the next decade through I Don't Know More, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movements. But like then, the movements have to have the realization that protest is not enough. We have to institutionalize our rebellions. But at the same time, we have to consistently water our grassroots and have respect for the grassroots. It has to be a bottom-up movement, not a top-down movement. I want to give thanks to one woman in particular that night who I ran into the first night I was at Occupy. I don't know her name. She only goes by the name of Catch Up. But when I went down there to Occupy and I heard people speaking, I got into my New York attitude and said, someone barged into my conversation. I told the person, mind your business. And the woman Catch Up said to me, we don't do that down here in Occupy. We listen to each other. We come to listen and we come to learn from each other. And since that time, that has been something that I have learned not only as an activist, but as a parent, as someone who's doing this work for the past 10 years and beyond that. So I'm thankful to each and every one of you for celebrating this momentous occasion for our rebellion and our movement towards freedom. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kazembe. Thank you. Okay, next up we have Jody Evans, co-founder of Code Pink. Jody, I hand it to you.
Thank you. Good morning from the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C., on the lands of the Anticostians. It's so lovely to be here with all these rock stars of building power and change. I was there at the beginnings of Occupy in New York City in the actions months prior and the action Friday night that led to people sleeping in Zuccotti Park. I then began sleeping there myself, bringing Make Out Not War message and how Wall Street was getting richer on war and not taking care of the needs of the people. As we launched Occupy DC, I pulled together the crowd to spell the 99% for John Quigley to photograph from above. I was so excited that I was in a group of young people who understood their country had failed them, all while the progressive NGO industrial complex had turned limp under Obama. I was a member of New York City, LA, Venice, and Women Occupy. Some of these continued for years. I toured many Occupies to teach how war sucks the money from the needs of the people. And Women Occupy had national gatherings and many calls on systems developed for Occupy that so many of us were trained on. I think they were called Maestro. It is now Zoom, but it was way more complex to come together. I worked to keep money out of Occupy, but it infiltrated and created silos and separations. When it was people contributing what was needed to fill community needs, it was so much better. I call these the war economy and the peace economy. The war economy is the extractive, destructive, and oppressive economy that alienates, divides, and is transactional. The peace economy that Occupy was modeling in the early days is the giving, sharing, caring, thriving, relational, resilient economy that without which none of us would be alive. We see it modeled so well in Standing Rock and the camps at Langley. This week, we remembered 9/11. The location of the towers are just blocks away from Zuccotti Park. And we've learned that the war on terror in these last 20 years have cost United States taxpayers $21 trillion while taking the US right increasing the patriarchy, resting terror in the minds of people across the globe, filling US streets with military equipment and militarizing city police officers while stealing the money needed for people and planet. Occupy, presidential campaigns around values, November in Seattle against neoliberalism and globalization, camps at pipelines across indigenous lands, all represent short, intense gatherings that arise from values we desire to bring into being. They are the ways we come together in intensity to learn, to be inspired, to build systems we need to be more effective, to make lifelong friends and comrades, and to stir the soil for what is needed next, as we have heard what has happened in these last 10 years. So yesterday on 9/12, as a different response to 9/11, we launched hashtag Cut the Pentagon for people, planet, peace, and a future. This is a continuation of the message of Occupy. From Occupy, we were scattered to all corners of the needs of people across the country, with months of education under our belts. Those seeds have built communities with strong values and clear ways to organize, and tools to organize with and to organize for those with needs. Most of these are local, which is where all organizing happens. Now is the time for the coming together of coalitions of people power to show that people are more powerful than the money. That we value peace more than the money they are making from war. We must end the war economy culture that it has created, the water we all swim in. Occupy created so many seeds that become beautiful flowers that have bloomed across the country and are filling in where the ugliness of the war economy had invaded. We continue that work. The empire is dying and a peace economy is arising. But as Naomi Klein reminds us, to change everything, it takes everyone. We need to continue to occupy the public spaces of our cities, exposing the violence of the war economy and modeling the peace economy, teaching about these violent structures we live in, so that we can take the country and the world back from the 1% that is now the 10%, as money has flowed to the rich like never before in these last 10 years, and it has flowed from war. Wall Street is afloat in money, and it is less afraid. We need to change that. So join us under the very big tent, which is hashtag Cut the Pentagon for people, planet, peace, and a future. Thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you so much for your message. Next, we have Kate Tyler, youth activists inspired to get involved in many political campaigns. Kate, I hand it over to you.
Hi. So unlike a lot of other people here, I was 10 years old this time in 2011. So I wasn't able to be involved in the movement at the time. I'm from Texas, but I do have a story from this time, and it actually really inspired me to get involved in politics like I am now. So in March 2012, I was visiting New York for a spring break trip, and Occupy was doing some events at that time in New York. And I was walking with my dad and my sister. We walked over Wall Street to get to Battery Park. And I remember my dad told me, we need to be careful in this part of town. There's people rioting down the street. And, you know, my dad was an avid Fox News viewer. And, you know, most kids would take their dad's word for things and be like, oh, I should be scared of these people. But I remember distinctly what I thought is, oh, I wonder why they're so angry. And I wanted to go see them, but, you know, my dad wouldn't let his 11-year-old daughter at the time do anything like that. So, you know, over time, I finally learned what was happening that day. And over time, I got very passionate about, you know, wealth inequality and, you know, politics of justice and all that sort of thing. And, as I got older, I was able to get involved in politics and speak truth to power. And I had a major part in the Mike Gravel campaign in 2018, where I had the opportunity to lead a call to fight for a spot on the debate stage with interim CEO of the DNC, Mary Beth Cahill, at the time. And, I was 18 and I was, doing crazy things like that. And I've gotten to have so many cool opportunities since then. And I'm continuing my fight how I can, and from this very young age. And, everyone involved in that inspired people like me. And there's so many people like me who are young and doing amazing things, because we don't really have much time left to change the world. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Kate. Appreciate you. I'm going to bring Jay Ponte back. Jay.
So we'd just like to thank all of our incredible panelists talking about a variety of issues. And I just want to echo what Kate just said. The IPCC report has given us 8 years to go carbon negative. The Joe Biden administration as being shamefully negligent in its addressing of the climate crisis, despite this being something that they have campaigned on. And we call upon everyone to join with the youth global climate strike starting next week. And it's time, in my opinion, for all of us to get out of our silos, which is something that Occupy did. It was about the 99%. It's time for us to break down all of the barriers that we have built against, standing together in solidarity for racial justice, for climate justice, for health justice, for undocumented justice, LGBTQIA justice, and all of the other critical issues that we face. And I'm just so honored to introduce this clip. We got a chance to interview Noam Chomsky on last week for the 10th anniversary of Occupy Wall Street, and on Act.tv. And just want to remind everyone, please come out if you're in New York on September 17th. Join in Zuccotti Park. Boston, LA also are going to be having gatherings. Or just go out and occupy wherever you're at. Wherever you're at, go and let them know. So we'd like to introduce that clip now.
It looked up Democratic program on climate change. You got Biden's program. Then it disappeared, replaced by how to contribute to the Democratic Party. I think it's a fair guess that there was a struggle going on inside, and the party managers succeeded in killing it. Well, still there. Ocasio-Cortez and Markey have introduced a resolution, not legislation, but a resolution, which is very good. It's approximately the same as what the International Energy Agency produced, feasible, fairly comprehensive set of detailed policies to try to address the looming catastrophe. Has to be moved from resolution to legislation, then implemented, not implemented by someone who says, it's a great program, OPEC, please increase oil production. No, that has to be stopped fast. Not much time. The COP26 conference is coming up in Glasgow in a couple of weeks. This is a time for intensive activism to make sure that to hold their feet to the fire, many governments participating, so they don't come out just with pleasant words or greenwashing, but with actual concrete proposals to sharply restrict production of petroleum, beginning now, fixed percentage every year, till we reach essentially zero production, limited amounts. It's okay. Has to be done and done fast.
Okay, I think that the video is complete. Is that correct, Jay?
Yes, absolutely. And you can go and find the full video on Juliana Forlano's show. And it will also replay on the 17th, as will this entire broadcast.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we're at that time now. We've come to the end, and at this point, we are going to now move to the Q&A portion. So if you do have any questions, we ask that you just type it in the chat box, and we will pose them to the specific speakers that you would like to address. And with your questions, just please indicate your first name, your last name, pronouns, and organization. So right now we're going to take our first question from, let's see, who do we have here? Patricia Brooks of Match Map Media, who wants to know from Jay Ponte, why write a book about Occupy Wall Street now? Like, why is this important today? And what do you hope to achieve in writing this?
The reason I wrote this book is because no one is going to tell our story but us. In my view, it is fundamental to understanding how Occupy reshaped the American political landscape if you want to have an accurate view of why the world is the way it is today. I think there are inherent lessons in it because no one is coming to save us. Bernie Sanders is not coming to save us. AOC is not coming to save us. Joe Biden is not coming to save us. That's one of the things that occupiers learned is that, and personally, we said that there were no leaders, but in my view, one of the things that we learned was that all of us are leaders. And I think there's also a theory of change that emerged because many of us, as the People for Bernie demonstrated, understood, was that we need to build an inside-outside strategy, combining outside grassroots for political power with inside electoral strategy so we can change the laws, change the system as public banking is doing. Don't be mistaken, public banking is fundamentally transforming the system, taking the money out of the big banks that are funding pipelines, that are funding weapons manufacturers, that are funding immigrant detention centers, private prisons, and is fundamentally reshaping our society. So I think it's impossible to understand the world today and also to address the challenges that we face without having this context. And lastly, you know, history is usually told by the stakeholders, the corporate state, the ruling class. And if we don't tell our stories, no one will. And I don't know if I'm anyone who is worthy to tell that story, but that's it. So, oh, and it looks like Tasha Martinez, it looks like she's joining us. So we just want to create some time for one of our indigenous activists. Tasha, did you end up in I think Tasha didn't end up in the panelist. So maybe she ended up, I don't think she was able to come in. So we're going to try to get to Tasha, who is standing on the front lines for fighting for line 3. Let's see if we can do that. In the meantime, while we're trying to figure that out, let's see if there's any other press questions. So back to you, Gina.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions. Jay, are we going to try and get Tasha on here, or? Yeah,
we'll try to figure that out. If maybe Albert, you can see if you can figure out if we can get her into the. While we're working on that, Gina, maybe you can ask some questions of our panelists.
Yes. Let's see. I do not see any questions coming in, but why don't we? Jay, I'm going to hand it over to you to maybe come up.
So it looks like Shahid actually has a question.
Oh, okay.
So I would pose this to really anybody on the panel, but the post-Occupy projects, we referenced some of them, Occupy Sandy, we referenced Occupy Oakland Privacy, Occupy the Farm. Every one of those projects in itself could be a whole conversation. And I guess I'd be curious which among them persist to this day. So Oakland Privacy is still active to this day. The Occupy the Farm, Gill Tract Community Farm, still active to this day, a decade later. Just wondering if maybe folks can shout out some of the other post-Occupy projects that continue to, if not reclaim public space today, carry forward the advocacy and the organizing around the issues that brought us all together 10 years ago and are continuing to bring more people as time proceeds and more people are starting to figure it out.
Excellent. Well, yes, Susan. Well, we know that public banking is still continuing. Susan, would you like to speak on that?
Well, all the ones that I mentioned still exist. The Omni is this huge building in Oakland where people meet and gather all the time. The Debt Collective exists nationally, and obviously public banking.
Great. Thanks, Susan. Does that answer your question, Shahid?
Awesome. And Kim Fracek is on Stack as well. She has something to say.
Also, one group I forgot to make a major shout out to, the People's Puppets of Occupy Wall Street, is still incredibly active. We still meet, we still have a studio space, and we make a lot of large scale art and puppets for a lot of different social justice movements. We made a lot of art for Black Lives Matter, for the Fight for 15 campaign, and numerous other like environmental stuff that Sane Energy Project works on, which was a sort of an offshoot of Occupy the Pipeline. So yeah, I mean, the art is still being made. I think puppets are going to probably show up with Lady Liberty in the park on Friday. So it'll be a really good day.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. Okay, I want to loop in Tasha Martineau, the Two-Spirit Indigenous anarchist and founder of Camp McGizzy. I think I pronounced that correct. I'm not sure. Tasha, if you can come on, that would be great.
Bonjour, Debiki Gizis Gijikwe, Nindishnakas Nagachiunang, Indunjuba, Megazita Autumn. Hello, everyone. My name is Tasha Martineau. I am a Two-Spirit Indigenous anarchist from the Fond du Lac Reservation and a co-founder of Camp McGizzy. Camp McGizzy is one of the most controversial camps that is currently in opposition of the Enbridge Line 3 tar sands pipeline. The reason we are the most controversial camp is because we chose to build our resistance right in the heart of the tribal community that chose to approve this project. We face a lot of severe lateral violence in the work that we do, but we continue fighting for a more viable future for BIPOC people because climate change is racial justice. Camp McGizzy is also known as Frontline medics. When there are protests in the city of Minneapolis or St. Paul, we're there to put our bodies on the line to ensure that Black bodies make it home because, as we said before, climate justice is racial justice. We've been, climbing into trenches, locking down to machinery, standing in front of this project since 2018, and the fight isn't over yet. They keep saying that they're 80% complete, 95% complete, but we still see unexposed pipe, and we're still inviting people out to join us at Camp McGizzy to put their bodies on the line and help us stop this project via people power. We've appealed to the PUC, we wrote to our tribal governments, we've done everything we physically and possibly could in a good and right and legal way. And now it's come to the point where Indigenous mothers who are terrified for the future of their children are literally climbing into the trenches dug by this corporation for this pipeline project. We ask that our allies come out here and join us. There's so much work that needs to be done in these camps. There's Camp McGizzy, which is in the Fond du Lac Reservation. There's the Welcome Water Protector Center in Palisades. There's the GNU Collective over near Park Rapids. All of these camps have been, doing everything they could to stop this project. As a direct action camp, Camp McGizzy and GNU Collective are known for, the nonviolent direct actions that were popularized during Standing Rock. But this here, the Line 3 project, is the last tar sands that will ever be built. And we need to stop it. It has a equivalent emission rate of 50 coal power plants. Now that's terrifying. I have an almost 2-year-old son here at home who is still breastfeeding, and I can't even promise him that growing up, he'll be able to gather wild rice, which is, the food that is so sacred to us as a people. Wild rice is who we are. It's the reason we traveled here, thousands of years ago to be in these sacred spaces. And there are so many reasons that the Enbridge Corporation creates when they come through the communities. You know, at the end of the day, whether they build this project or not, we still have the chance to make sure that no oil flows through these pipes. But the division that Enbridge has sowed in this community alone, I don't think we'll recover from it. You know, I'm terrified for my children to grow up in this community where those of us here standing chose to take a stand because we know it was right. And, you know, that's just a part of the issue. Another big issue that happens when these pipeline projects are built is the increase of violence against women along the route. There's a 22% increase. And these are communities that have already been devastated by the MMIW epidemic, sex trafficking, and drug trafficking. Oftentimes these workers, they come here from out of state, you know, in the midst of a global pandemic. Oftentimes there are work hiatuses, such as mud season, and you've got 4,200 out of state workers sitting in hotel rooms with a lot of time on their hands and a lot of money in their pockets. Many of those men are going to go looking for a girl or a boy or even a child. You know, many of these men have been busted for sex trafficking. The last 3 recent sex trafficking busts that happened within Minnesota, with each one, 2 Enbridge workers were part of those busts. 2. Now that's terrifying. You know, as Indigenous women all across Turtle Island, we have to be really vigilant about the safety of our children. My babies are screaming in the background. But, you know, growing up, they taught me the statistic 1 in 3. And I have 3 beautiful Indigenous daughters. And so, you know, every morning when I wake up, I have to dress my children. And it's not because they can't do it themselves. It's because I need to know what they're wearing in case one of them doesn't come home. And, you know, this is a fear that Indigenous women face all across Turtle Island, but it increases every time these out-of-state workers come into these communities. And, you know, oftentimes these men are also peddling drugs. They're within our hotels, our restaurants, refusing to wear masks. We're living under an occupation where these men have more rights to be here than we do. And it's terrifying. You know, we're afraid. My elders are afraid to go fishing. They're afraid to go ricing. And, you know, Camp Migizi, we're a very beautiful community. We're very resilient, but you know, we get tired of having to be so resilient. We get tired of having to always be strong. And, you know, with this ricing season, you know, sometimes we have to make a choice. Are we going to go ricing today to bring wild rice to our elders? Are we going to perform direct action to stop this project? And oftentimes we're able to do both, but we would be able to do it even more so, you know, with more people coming out to join us. You know, we have a lot of skills, life skills, such as hunting, foraging, you know, cultural activities that we would love to teach you if you were interested in coming out and joining us. I hope you can take the time to educate yourself, you know, on what Line 3 is, on, you know, all of the different issues that arise with it, and especially, you know, its interconnection with the missing murdered Indigenous women epidemic, because that was the reason Camp Migizi started, is because, you know, we already lose our women at a higher rate than any other demographic. And when these pipeline projects go through and they're desecrating our sacred lands, oftentimes these men's eyes are also trespassing the bodies of our children. And that's a really scary thing to have to deal with on a daily basis. So I'm just, you know, putting love and prayers out there for all the other Indigenous mothers who are faced with the same fear, and, you know, hoping to meet more warriors here on the front lines. Thank you so much for joining me in the space and, you know, giving me a chance to speak. I love and appreciate each and every single one of you, and I hope to see you out here on the front lines.
Tasha, quick follow-up question. Many of us occupiers and Bernie followers who went to the front lines at Standing Rock, where we also experienced brutal repression, as we did during Occupy Wall Street, by the corporate state, which was the combination of the police state, private mercenaries, and oil companies actively colluding to repress movements. what can people who are going to join, where can they go to get more information, and what should they know going into joining that fight?
So I would suggest people to follow GNU Collective on social media, such as Facebook and Instagram. Also, go to stopline3.org. And also, Camp Migizi has a Facebook and an Instagram as well. We can be contacted. What? Get out of here. Mom's out there. Stopline3.org has a lot of information, but also be aware that just like Standing Rock, police are incentivized to arrest and brutalize water protectors, and they're being paid to do so via the escrow account that was, the PUC had put into place before the project had begun being built.
And one of the things we've learned a lot since Occupy Wall Street, especially about the intersectionality aspects of racism, systemic racism, colonialism, patriarchy. Progressive leftist movements are not immune to this. So Tasha, just really quickly, what should people know before, if they want to show up as an ally or an accomplice, what should people know going into joining the front lines?
So nobody arrives as an ally, as non-Indigenous people, you're going to spend the rest of your life learning how, to step away from the supremacy that non-Indigenous people were built in. The difference between an ally and an accomplice is an ally is someone who empowers, uplifts, and protects Indigenous people, whereas an accomplice is someone, who is willing to put their body on the line so that Indigenous people can live to fight another day. Keeping in mind that decolonization is for everyone, even as non-Indigenous people who fled here, on the way, you lost your feathers and you lost your shells, but we were all tribal people once. And the fight against Line 3 isn't just about stopping a pipeline. Protect the Sacred goes so much deeper than that. It's about reconnecting, to the people, the land, the water, and all life around you. And here at Camp Migizi, as activists, sometimes, we find a fight and we let the fight become us, so much so that we bury ourselves there and we lose parts of who we were. At Camp Migizi, we're going to challenge you to heal, so that when we step forward into the next fight, we can do so putting our best foot forward. And we do that by honoring sacred warriors. We do that by ensuring that, self-care is happening and, the revitalization of our spirit, so that when the next fight does come, because there will always be another fight, we're ready and we're well prepared. After Standing Rock, many people went home with such severe trauma that they never healed. So at Camp Migizi, we're going to ask you to be brave. We're going to ask you to love one another, and we're going to ask you to heal.
Thank you, Tasha. And it's worth noting that Occupy was not a tactic. It's important to separate the tactic from the movement. And the tactic was not invented by occupiers. Indigenous people occupied Alcatraz. They occupied Wounded Knee. It was used by labor movements. It was used by the Poor People's Campaign and Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, and others. So we want to acknowledge that it wasn't. I am here also on occupied Tongva land. But Gina, do you have any questions? Any other questions for our panelists?
Yeah, there is one more question. This goes to Jelani and/or Kazembe about your thoughts on how Occupy Wall Street may have affected the rise of the BLM, Black Lives Matters movement. And again, that goes to either Jelani and/or Kazembe.
So if Kazembe, I defer to Kazembe because that's my brother. If he wants to start off, he can. If not, I'll give a little overview into what I believe.
I was going to defer to you, brother, because you're my leader. So I follow your lead, you brother. Go ahead, man.
Now, respect. So what Occupy did was it showed that flashpoints of activism wasn't just going to be able to happen in that time period during 2011. It showed that we needed to get out in the streets as people of color. We needed to get out in the streets more, and we needed to be more vocal and in our direct actions and what that looked like. So it didn't say, hey, it was a catalyst. It helped say, hey, you know what? I see all these Caucasian people out here getting arrested and fighting for their freedoms, and their struggle is not deep as our struggle. So we need to be out here. We need to also reclaim our spaces. So to me, the Occupy movement helped generate that, help push that a little bit forward, activate the civic engagement part of African Americans, and say, no, we're tired too, and call on the spirit of the social justice activists that led them before this time. So for me, that's why I speak to it like that, and I was able to see firsthand what that meant, because a lot of people, when Occupy started, a lot of people were like, well, there's no people of color. They talking about some other stuff, but they ain't talking about our stuff. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why I stayed down there. That's why I stayed active, because I thought it was important to amplify the message. Like, no, see, y'all looking at the wrong thing. Maybe you don't understand, but it's all connected. But more importantly, the most important thing is that they're getting out here in these streets and they're being active. They're activating and building on that. And then you could find synergy. And then, of course, as Kim said, you know, people found synergy and the cross-sectionality of it and the connections with all of it as it moved forward. So for me, it was a good catalyst to relaunch social justice movements in our communities, building on, of course, police reform and police accountability, and economic and education justice. So that's what I saw. And then Brother Kazimbe, you could build on that, but that, you know, for me, that's what I saw. And that's why I say it was a good catalyst for the BLM movement. And other things. And I just want to go back to one other piece after you speak, Kazimbe. Occupy wasn't always electorally friendly. And there was a lot of pushback to electoral politics as one of the prongs for change. And so I just want to speak on that after Kazimbe speaks.
Thank you so much, my brother. And I concur with everything you said. I think people came down to Wall Street to be amplified and to amplify each other, and that was the most powerful thing that came out of that. And that's directly tied to, African American democratic traditions of call and response. So you talk about mic checks, you know what I'm saying? You're talking about the call and response to the church. You know, you talk about Tupac, holla if you hear me. That whole entire, the sonic force of Occupy is fit into orality of the Black liberation movement, because the Black liberation movement is an oral movement. It's not a written movement, it's an oral movement. And Occupy had a sonicness to it, right? It was a symphony, right? And so what the brother Jelani talked about was that, you know, people were out there remixing and jumping on each other's tracks because you had Occupy. I didn't know nothing about pipelines until I got down to Occupy, and I could talk about pipelines in relationship to stop and frisk. And then all of a sudden you going home talking about stop and frisk, and I'm talking about pipelines. And then we're both talking about pipelines between the prison industrial complex. You know what I'm saying? So we were sharing information in real time. And then in the embodiment of it was the physicality of us being all together, us being all sweaty, smelling each other, talking to each other. We don't have that right now in this Zoom moment that we have in terms of the relationship of COVID, right? And so unfortunately, because of the crisis, our ability to gather together has been limited. And so our movements have been limited at this particular time, right? But, you know, that movement allowed, that physicality allowed for the opening for the BLM movement. So like when I talk to you about Troy Davis, the marches that led for Troy Davis, you know, began to end at Occupy. And that the last marches that happened when Occupy was wrapping up was the movement for justice for Trayvon Martin, right? And so those are the bookends.
Facts.
Those are the bookends of those movements that led to and allowed for the development of the direct action, and developed into what we know now as the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a very wide movement of many different ideological strains, electoral politics, Marxist politics, anarchist politics, variety of different things. One thing I want to say too, brother, before I give it back to Jelani and my dear brother, is this, right? You know, last week we celebrated 20 years of 9/11, and you know, and then 10 years this year of Occupy. I was at both. I was affected by both 9/11 and Occupy, and I can't think of more of a better way to think about how we have to frame the world and what vision we want. You know what I'm saying? Do we want the terror of 9/11 and the repression of 9/11, or do we want the beauty, right, and the potentiality of Occupy? And that's what hangs in a balance right now of our movement selves, particularly as the sister Kate Evans so said, in terms of how we think about this issue of climate change and how things going on. But you know, the brother Jelani had an additional point he wanted to jump on too, so I want to give the mic back to him.
Yeah, and if I may, you know, because I know we're short on time and I don't want to take up everybody's time, but yeah, I just want to address, so coming down to Occupy, what I noticed, and when we started, George and I started talking about electoral politics, a lot of occupiers pushed back. They didn't want no parts of it. And because they saw it as a mainstream tactic, I guess, for change, and that it was easily co-optable. And so George and I were, along with our friend Eric Tinker and John Resnick and a few others, Eric started a working group, Occupy the Elections. And we said that it was important that electoral politics was acknowledged as a prong that needed to be accessed in order to push the change that we wanted to see, the better world that we wanted to see. And we had a lot of pushback, but then that's when we understood, like, hey, this is real, and these young people, these other individuals that are pushing back need to understand that this is just one prong and not the only prong. So I'm glad that, you know, African Americans for Bernie, my man Stan Williams, and a couple other friends reached out to me, and People for Bernie, and then, you know, that it became something that occupiers embraced. And so I wanted to acknowledge that, and I'm glad that we were able to move forward and see it as a legitimate prong to and occupy all spaces, as George said in Occupation Freedom, occupy all spaces.
Great. Shahid or George, do you have any follow-up to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in after Brother Shahid.
Right on. Appreciate the point, Jelani, when you raise it. And Kazembe was talking at one point about the substantive intersectionality, right? Some people would go to the occupations motivated to speak out about student debt relief, and they'd learn about indigenous rights. And some people, you know, the cross-pollination of our movements. And I feel like one of the things Jelani's pressing on is the methodological intersectionality. Movements express themselves in lots of different ways. We reclaim public space. We advocate for policies. In the local level, we organize national coalitions. We run candidates. We change policy through lots of different things. We change culture through lots of different things. And for a lot of people, electoral politics is the default. And so they come to recognize all of the other ways to engage as they grow deeper in their own respective struggles. And I think that's happened in the current generation of people who, for instance, were inspired by Bernie Sanders, that they came to electoral politics through a visible standard bearer. And they have recently come to discover things like direct action, things like mutual aid, which many of us have been doing for decades. And I would just implore the activists of today's movement to finish the game. I think of electoral politics as like the ninth inning of a baseball game. And you can't just play the ninth inning. You have to play the first 8 innings. You have to do the direct action. You have to do the community building. You have to do the coalition building, the issue-based advocacy, the art and action. All that has to happen for electoral politics to have any opportunity to be meaningful, because all those things have to happen for our candidates to represent our communities in the face of this corporate establishment. But in the same way that you can't abandon the first 8 innings of the game to focus exclusively on electoral politics, to abandon the ninth inning of the baseball game to say that this arena is inherently co-opted when we know it's the exclusive way to turn the arm of the state, which is at the moment the juridical authority, in any way away from its predatory vector that it's been on for decades. And, there's a whole, theory many people would advocate for paths to change that are at the cultural level. And those are very important. That's kind of the anarchist vision, and I fully embrace that as well. But as long as we are, for instance, hurtling off a climate cliff due to industrial scale policies that only Congress, only our policy-making institutions have the opportunity to fix, we can't abandon the ninth inning of the baseball game either. So big props to everybody like Jelani, like George, like the other candidates around the country who came out of the movement and contested these spaces that are hostile. Ultimately, each of us are running to occupy government spaces and electorals, not just electoral spaces, but government spaces, with the vision that prompted us all to come out in the streets 10 years ago, and they continue to drive so many other people to this movement to defend the future. It's you, George.
Yeah, thank you, brother. And, I mentioned before the electoral, but I also talked about cultural relevancy. And we were in, before we started to engage in the Occupy the election space, which is something that we knew as a method, as a part of our methodology from background work, we engaged in the cultural connection, which was bringing, you mentioned the sonicness, this flavor. We brought the hip hop anthem. We were in the middle of the movement, bringing that creative energy of hip hop, that cardboard box on a sidewalk, transforming a sidewalk into a dance studio, that cardboard box in Zuccotti, transforming Zuccotti into a platform for a global movement. It was really that energy that we brought, but it was the learnings that we had, right? So I wanted to take that energy back into the electoral space, recognizing that, yes, there was a lot of new understandings of intersectionality, a lot of new activists, a lot of new engaged folks, people who had mistrust, and we brought all of that together. So it wasn't that there was any one particular conversation that said, yeah, we're going to do electoral politics, or that we wouldn't. It was all of this pushing and all of this stuff. But I remember one moment in a park, I think we were in Fort Greene Park in Brooklyn, and we were in the park with occupiers, and people were talking about issues that were directly connected to the quality of life for the people who are in the projects, the public housing projects just across the street. And
it was Occupy Brooklyn at that time.
Right. And I remember those direct actions that went into neighborhoods that started to really bring, where we did the eviction defense in East New York. Right? Those actions started saying that this movement cared about people's, where they lived in our community, which were people of color. And I remember that conversation in the park saying, we're here and we hope that the people in the projects will come to us, except when we go to them, it looks like how they expect it. So we need to go to them. We need to knock on their doors and bring that electoral energy into a direct action space, so that we just don't say we're going to just wait on the election, but that our challenge in the election is an action, is going to create ripples, is going to bring in people, and we may win elections at whatever point in time, but at that point, it was another front of engagement that has absolutely rippled. We've seen victories. AOC's been mentioned here. When I see all of that groundwork, I know the groundwork that we laid to say we cannot abandon this space, because that's where we're going to find a lot of our folk around the issues that we could deal with in a local level, because all politics is local.
And don't get it twisted, there were a number of occupiers behind the scenes in several of those campaigns.
Oh yeah, absolutely, across the board. And I know that for us, we launched that Bum Rush to Vote was the name of our direct action, and because we wanted to put a name to it, so we Bum Rush to Vote. And the first out of New York was this what we got on a Democratic ballot for the House of Representatives, and in 2012, and then Jelani ran for city council just in our circle, but we knew that there was things happening in Philadelphia. Brother Nate out there. We knew that there were things happening in the South and definitely out in California where there were people saying we're willing to engage in that space too, because
Seattle,
because we knew that we would leave no stone unturned, that you had to do that, bring it from every angle. And that was the diversity of tactics that we saw that was really important, that brought in a classic kind of way to engage community with the space of this dynamic energy, telling people that another world is possible.
Great, thank you. That's a great segue. Thank you, George, as we kind of wrap up here, but I would love to have everyone turn on their cameras so that each one of us can share about 30 seconds on giving a message on how people can follow the efforts, get involved, follow you. And George, you kind of that was a good segue on how people can get involved, but if you can just kind of repeat, we'll start with you. Just what's your 30-second message to people listening out here on how they can get involved and that's it. Get involved. Go ahead.
Sure. I just remind everyone that wherever you are and whatever you have today is enough. In our song, Occupation Freedom, we said we are the ones we've been waiting for. And we know that to be true. There's not going to be a savior or a hero that's going to do it all. It is all of us together that make the tapestry of possibilities and hope present for everyone. So as we continue to walk forward, we continue to raise our voices wherever we show up, we make a difference. We're small ripples, but together, the aggregate is what creates the wave of possibility. I'm in Alaska. There are big challenges here. We're frontline of energy policy. We're frontline of climate change policy. We're in the front line of even the recapturing of the politic through the lens of indigenous rights. So find us up in Alaska, in Anchorage. I'm George Martinez, and an easy website, george2021.com, to learn a little bit more about what we've been doing up here and to get connected to some of the engagements that we're doing in our city. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. I'm just going to kind of go up top here. And as you're messaging out, to also love for all of you to consider the young people, the youth that are putting themselves out on the front line as well. Jerry, I'd love to have you come on now and share your thoughts, your 30-second message here.
If you want to do something, get involved. Excuse me, retake. If you want to do something and get involved, include other people. Not everybody in the 99% is good. Not everybody in the 1% is bad. And we need to be able to get allies in the corporate world. We need to get allies in the so-called enemy camp, because if they're reached, these are the ones that can make more of a creative difference than any. When I went into creating abolition of medical debt, I was in the middle of my own industry, which said, what are you doing? Drawing attention to debt collectors. I'm doing it because it needs to be done. I don't want to see any more books like this by a friend of mine, Never Pay the First Bill. I don't want to see these published anymore. I don't want to see this kind of thing where I'm going to be parading in the park with a sign saying to everybody, you should be doing what should have been done anyway. So find the people that are listening to you and leverage that relationship. Include them. This is an inclusive thing, not an exclusive thing.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for that message. Shad, we'll move on over to you now.
Thank you, Gina. To people who aren't involved, if you see the crisis of the future, if you care, get out of your chair. If you are involved, look for ways to engage your creative passions. It's one of the essences that I heard George particularly talking about. You know, when we contend for culture, there are ways beyond politics that each of us show up in our communities. I'm a poet, so my first political acts were reclaiming public space with hip hop MCs, right? Like that's a way that you can engage, and a way that each of us can bring our unique intersections to the movement, right? Don't think of the movement as a thing to join, think of the movement as a thing to add to. We weren't a leaderless movement, we were a leaderful movement. And every one of us, every one of you are part of that vision. And folks can follow my frontal assault on the corporate democratic establishment at shahid.fyi. And I just close again with that last message. If you care, get out of your chair. There's a million ways to help if we just show up.
Ooh, I love that. Love poems. Thank you so much, Shad. Next, Susan, pass it over to you. And Susan, if you can turn your camera on, that would be great.
You're on mute, Susan.
Apologize. Wherever you are, Google public banking and join whatever local group there is going on in your neighborhood and start a public bank.
Thank you very much, Susan. Jelani?
Well, there's a couple of things that I would like to say in my 30 seconds. I'm trying to get it off quick, so excuse me. So the first thing I say is to allies. Allies, if you consider yourself an ally, you need to put resources at individuals' disposal that they need, and unconditionally be able to do that. As an ally, consider that an ally. The next thing is to the young people. Young people, please just engage, be active, engage, engage, engage. Do not sit in your house behind a computer. Go outside and engage in the world and travel. Those things will make you critical thinkers, and then you'll be activated to move down the line. So get out and travel and engage with others.
Thank you so much, Jelani. That's a good message. Engage with others. And finally, Kazembe, if you can wrap it up for us.
I just want to tell the young people that I am so proud of you. You are so fearless. So I learned something from you every single day. And the world that we have left for you is not the best. Has not been the best handoff. But we're going to work on that. We're going to work on being a better handoff in our movements, in our other spaces. And we're going to co-lead this spaces together. And I just want to say, just to kind of piggyback on my brother Jelani, travel the world, understand the world, but also understand the best experiences in the world do not require money, right? If you're in a city and you're next to a university, press on those librarians to open up those resources of knowledge for you and your friends. Know for the fact that, if you live in a place like New York City, you can go to Schomburg Library and see original letters by Malcolm X and James Baldwin. You know what I'm saying? Way better than anything you can see on the internet. So go in there, understand, make the librarian your best friend, and you'll be opening up all sorts of doors. And that's what I learned. And all that is for free.
Thank you so much, Kazembe. With closing, I'd like to hand it over now for closing remarks. First, I just want to thank everybody who stuck it out and listened. And if you were here with us in this event for honoring the 10-year anniversary of Occupy Wall Street, we truly thank you. Thank you, all of the panelists who stuck it out and stayed here and offered your thoughts and comments. I now want to hand it back over to Jay for closing remarks and to close this conference out.
Thank you, Gina. And I just want to thank all of you for your stand. Everybody's continued to be in the trenches, and just the bravery, the solidarity, the vision, the courage that you have demonstrated, and for being the change, really standing. And it's also who you are being. And I want to, in closing, just echo a few of the remarks that were made. And to the young people, I would say especially learn from the mistakes that we have made. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to have our young people spend 10 years like we did, making lots of mistakes and what we learned in our organizing against the corporate state. So I would urge you to also call us in, and to anyone who's on the front lines that's been a veteran, definitely reach out to the young people because they have incredible ideas, vitality. I learn new things from young people all the time. On September 24th, there's the global youth climate strikes. They are calling upon the Biden administration to stop line 3 by executive order, roll out a 2,500 human health buffer around every oil and gas project. And of course, we need to stop them. They're already greenlighting new pipelines. California, a supermajority, is greenlighting new fossil fuel extraction pipelines. We need to stop this. This should be the moment in the movie when the meteor is coming, the big scary aliens, where the whole world comes together to stop this, to save ourselves, and yet we're going in the wrong direction. So, and lastly, one of the things we learned from Occupy, no one is coming to save us. No one is coming to save us. You are the one you were waiting for, and if nobody's giving you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And lastly, I would say to like our white brothers and sisters, do the inner work. When you show up to the front lines, realize that patriarchy, colonialism, racism is systemic issues. It is in the drinking water. We need to also do the inner work of anti-racism and to take on these paradigms that we have internalized because it's in the drinking water, because this can create a lot of problems. It's a very complex issue. And lastly, I would say, like Tasha said, do the inner work of healing, because our trauma ends up a lot of times also creating a lot of problems. But I just want to say thank you to ACT.tv. Thank you to everybody come together in Zuccotti Park on September 17th. Thank you to our illustrious uncle Noam Chomsky for also contributing. All of our panelists, you are amazing. Everyone watching, it is up to us, and we will see you out there on the front lines. Tune in to act.tv. Follow us on Facebook. Look up all of these panelists. Follow them on social media to find out what is going on and how to get involved. Thank you.